Even though the Nintendo Switch 2 is now out and about, it's still very much in its infancy, which makes this the perfect time to look back at Mario's past showings on the consoles that came before it. As you could probably tell from the title, this time around we're mostly looking at the missers, the failures, the flops, the worst Mario game on every Nintendo console, from the NES all the way until the Nintendo Switch. And wouldn't you know it, we start with the Famicom or NES. Technically, there were Mario games released on platforms before this, like the Donkey Kong ports for Atari 2600, ColecoVision and the Game & Watch, but since those are literally the only games, starting with the NES makes a lot more sense. This gives us between 20 and 25 candidates. It depends a bit on what you count, but even at its lowest it's a lot more than the meager 3 of the Atari. Of course, it goes without saying that judging NES games by the standards of the year 2025 wouldn't be entirely fair. So games that would probably struggle to hold your attention today, like Wrecking Crew or Wario's Woods, really don't look so bad if you view them from the framework of the late 80s. Even what I would consider the worst of all mainline Super Mario games, The Lost Levels, manages to stay clear of winning the questionable title because of this. Instead, in our search for the worst game, we need to shift our focus to 3 games with quite similar design ideas: Mario is Missing, Mario's Time Machine, and Donkey Kong Jr. Math. All educational titles, and while that of course already puts them at a bit of a disadvantage compared to the rest, it doesn't have to be a problem. If the game serves its purpose well, then I can overlook not being the target audience for it. That's the thing. All 3 of these games are absolutely plagued with problems. Mario's Missing and Mario's Time Machine are DOS games developed by the software Toolworks and brought to NES by Radical Entertainment. The ideas behind these titles are that Mario and Luigi learn about our real-world geography and history through an adventure set in our real world, which on paper is not such a bad idea. It would never be made today, but I used to play games not too dissimilar from this on my computer when I was a kid, and enjoyed them decently enough. What is probably worth considering a worry for your educational title is when your list of inaccuracies and mistakes is the longest segment on your wiki page, as is the case for Mario's Missing, and while Mario's Time Machine on NES is probably better than the DOS version on account of not being a port but rather a remake that fixes some of the problems, it's still not good. But while these 2 titles remain blemishes on the Mario name and continue to be ridiculed until this very day by YouTubers like me, I would still say they're more fun educational games than Donkey Kong Jr. Math is. For a game that seemingly only exists to teach children how to do basic maths, it fails at that spectacularly. Most kids already find math either difficult or boring, so probably the worst way to introduce them to it is by creating a game where you do the same mind-numbing levels the entire time. And if you fail, you're just screwed. The game doesn't actually teach you math, it tests if you know it, which honestly makes it a little difficult to decide whether this can actually be considered an educational game. And if it isn't, then man, this is one of the worst games Nintendo has ever made. Hardly a controversial opinion, I'm well aware of that, but hey, not my problem, everyone knows this game sucks. We continue with the SNES, where the technical answer is 100% the ports of Mario's Time Machine and Mario's Missing. Like, it isn't even close. No other Mario game on this console was even remotely this bad. So while those are definitely the winners, I don't just want to skip past one of the most iconic consoles of all time, and instead spend my time talking about the worst NES exclusive game. And that means that the Mario's early years titles are also out, more educational games developed by the software Toolworks that I will say at least are less unnecessarily complicated as Mario's Time Machine and Mario's Missing. Still far from my official recommendations, but they're not as bad as the other 2. And since they're not exclusives, we're looking for another title to talk about, and really, I think it's quite difficult. It's solid title after solid title as far as the big games go, and the smaller titles are more puzzle focused, which holds up quite well and makes games like Mario & Wario, Wrecking Crew 98 and Mario Super Picross still pretty decent titles even today. They won't blow you away, but they serve their purpose perfectly fine. So my vote for the worst Mario game exclusive to SNES goes to Yoshi Safari, which is not even remotely as bad as Donkey Kong Jr. Math, but it doesn't weigh up to titles like Super Mario World, Super Mario RPG, the first Mario Kart or the 3 Donkey Kong Country games. Yoshi Safari is nowadays best known for its unique gimmick, the Super Scope, which has been present as an item in the Super Smash Bros. Series ever since Melee. It is to this day still the only Mario game ever made in the genre of rail shooters, which originated in arcades and honestly kinda died out the moment home consoles became a thing. They basically don't exist anymore, save for a little bump when motion controls were the rage and the surprising return of Pokemon Snap. But to hone in on Yoshi Safari specifically a little more, I think the biggest problem of this game is that it offers very little in terms of actual content and uniqueness. This game is basically just a rail shooter brought from the arcade to your home and gives it a Mario skin. There is nothing unique about it compared to other games in its genre, and while it's definitely not a bad time, I just don't think it's worth playing today, and even if you were looking to buy a Mario game in the 90s for your SNES, this was the worst one you could get. The educational titles notwithstanding, obviously. We enter the realm of handhelds next for the Game Boy, which technically released before the SNES, but since the SNES has similar worse games as the NES, I decided to change that order a little. Compared to the two home consoles, the Game Boy lacks any truly terrible titles, being mostly filled with games that barely hold up, but were far from the worst thing in the world when they were released. So I'm left with a bit of a conundrum with what I would consider the two candidates. The first is Donkey Kong Land, a sort of port of Donkey Kong Country. The fact they were able to bring a game like this to the original Game Boy is nothing short of a miracle, a true technological accomplishment, but as far as actually playing it goes, it's horrible. The screen is way too small for such a platformer, and graphically it seemed like they were focused too much on whether they could, that they never stopped to think whether they should. DKC is one of the SNES's best looking games, and while Donkey Kong Land really tries to emulate that same feeling, the Game Boy simply lacks the capabilities to deliver, resulting in a game that actually ends up worse to the eye than much simpler looking games like Super Mario Land. But purely the fact that they were able to pull this off makes me respect Donkey Kong Land enough to not consider it the worst. And instead, the title is going to Yoshi. That's it, just Yoshi. Developed by Game Freak, the studio that would give the Game Boy one of its best games a few years later, was at the wheel here for a puzzle game that's just very boring. The Game Boy was such a great system for puzzlers like Dr. Mario and Tetris, and Yoshi falls short of those titles so badly that similarly to Yoshi Safari, even at the time it wasn't worth a recommendation. The gameplay is yawn-inducing, it's way too slow, and it's also surprisingly luck-based, which is of course always a factor for puzzle games, but Yoshi definitely takes it too far by removing some key elements that make a similar game like Tetris feel more fair. And with that, we enter the era of the 3D graphics with a Nintendo 64. We have a smaller selection of games to choose from, about 10 or so, and many of them will bring back great memories. There's definitely not a standout terrible title here. I wouldn't recommend the first Mario Party today, or at any point in time where a later entry exists, and Yoshi's Story is definitely a dip in the series compared to Yoshi's Island, but I definitely don't think it's worthy of the title of a worst Mario game on the console. But really, no title does. My pick for the worst Mario game for N64 is one I'd give a 6 out of 10. Still decent, nothing to be immensely ashamed of. And that game is Dr. Mario 64. The problem with this title is that it's more of the same, yet also worse than the Dr. Mario games that came before. And that puts it in an awkward position where, yeah, it's Dr. Mario, already not super exciting, and that's only made worse when you realize this isn't exactly the definitive version of it. I can also imagine that at the time, near the end of the N64's lifespan and with the GameCube coming up, the decision to make this game sprite-based definitely confused some people. I'm pretty sure it's the only Mario game on N64 that doesn't use 3D models. It's an odd decision that probably only contributed more to the fact this has become such a forgotten game, even if the sprites actually hold up better than some of the 3D looks of the era. But it does make it feel a bit like a GBA game, where it probably would have felt more at home. Speaking of which, it's back to handhelds for the Game Boy Advance, which has a Mario library that's mostly carried by ports and Superstar Saga. There are quite some candidates for the worst game on the console though, I would say, most of them released in the later years. Mario Pinball Land, DK King of Swing, Mario Party Advance, all are super weird games that I wouldn't consider recommendations, but at the same time they're so unorthodox that it's hard not to enjoy them at least a little for what they are. Like, they won't be your favorite, but at least you'll get that feeling of, at least I never played something quite like this. And even though that phrase also works for Yoshi Topsy Turvy, I would say it is most definitely the worst game out of the group, and that has everything to do with the controls. Playing games with odd concepts is one thing, playing a boring game that is only unorthodox because the controls are horrible is another. And that's definitely what Yoshi Topsy Turvy is. This game's only right to exist comes from its tilt-based control scheme, which works, I guess, but it's just not fun for a game like this. It worked great for WarioWare Twisted, which played to its strengths. Yoshi Topsy Turvy doesn't do that in the slightest. And then I haven't even mentioned that this game commits one of the crimes a Yoshi game should never commit, and that's not looking charming. All GBA games that use those crappy 3D models look terrible, and Yoshi's Topsy Turvy is one of the worst offenders of them all. There's no charm here, no cuteness, no style. Just an awful game that has deservingly been forgotten. On to the GBA's similarly colored brother, the GameCube. Now, I think the GameCube has a phenomenal library of Mario games on offer, to the point where I think it's incredibly difficult to pick the worst one. Which would have led me right into the arms of the absolute mess that Donkey Kong was at the time. I mean, I think Jungle Beat is acceptable, but 3 Donkey Konga games? Come on, that's ridiculous. So yeah, take your pick, one of those is the worst. Since that's no fun, I want to zoom in on only the Mario games here, and pick a worst game that I actually think is really good. So keeping that limitation in mind, I would say the worst game to actually be a Mario title is Mario Party 4. And I don't think Mario Party 4 is bad at all, but I do think it's easily the worst Mario Party on the GameCube, which means there are 3 games that do its own lane better than it. That should be more than enough to qualify it as the worst. Mario Party 4 was the first game to bring along redesigns for the Mario cast, which resulted in an art style that can occasionally feel a little strange and conflicting. They clearly hadn't found the right tone all across the board yet. And speaking of board, while I don't think the boards here are the worst the series has ever seen, they do stick out compared to both the games before it and after it as rather unimaginative and non-immersive. Like, yeah, there are themes, but they're not super pronounced, unique, or really that impactful. The game does have some solid minigames and side modes, but that's not enough to save it from simply being a worse Mario Party than 5, 6 and 7, giving you very little reason to ever pick this up again. Now, part of the reason why I decided to hone in on an actual Mario game for the GameCube was because I knew what was coming. When looking at the offerings of the extended Mario universe on DS, I'm sorry, but I cannot do anything else but highlight how bad some of the output of Yoshi, Wario and Donkey Kong was. For example, Wario Master of Disguise is such a disappointing title in a series that had until that point been so strong. The touchscreen controls are way too intrusive and really ruin the experience and flow of the game. Not to mention that for a game that dives deeper into puzzles, the puzzles are quite bad and boring. I do like the creativity of the game, it's not unredeemable, but it's definitely one of the DS's weaker offerings. Donkey Kong Jungle Climber is more of what already was not exciting on GBA. It's not bad on its own, it's probably better than King of Swing even, but I just don't know why this game was worthy of a sequel. The gameplay is way too limited and one-dimensional to be exciting, and once you've played one level, you've really played them all. Crazy to think that this of all games was King K. Rool's final showing. But as flawed as these 2 games are, they at least are not a tech demo sold as if it was an actual game. Enter Yoshi Touch and Go, one of the earliest DS games, and it shows. All this game has going for it is having touch controls, which were of course novel at the time. But even the very day it was released, WarioWare Touched was also available and did that exact same concept 20 times better. This game has no content, it has no longevity, it is essentially a simple mobile game before such a thing even existed. Never mind why you would boot up this game today, I don't even know why you would play it a week after it came out with WarioWare Touched and Super Mario 64 DS already available. What is positive is that Yoshi at least redeemed himself somewhat compared to Wario and DK, with Yoshi's Island DS releasing later and being pretty good, but that doesn't save Yoshi Touch and Go from being the worst thing the extended Marioverse had to offer. As we look at the Wii, we find a situation that very closely mirrors what happened on the GameCube. By far the worst game of the extended Mario universe is a Donkey Kong title. Donkey Kong Barrel Blast is one of the worst games I have ever played, and I'm pretty sure the only one I returned as a kid after an afternoon, because it was just so unplayable. It just didn't work, flat out didn't work. And just like the GameCube, if we focus on Mario games only, the winner cannot be anything else but a Mario Party title. Entry numero 9, aka the one that killed the series. It was the last Mario game to be released on the Wii, and let's just say it was a swan song filled with false notes. What can I say about this game that hasn't been said a million times already? Is the word car enough to make you understand? How about some of the worst board designs the series has ever seen? The game's series may mirror the GameCube, but make no mistake, Mario Party 9 makes 4 look like Game of the Year material. Hell, it makes Mario Party 8 Game of the Year material. That's arguably even worse. I don't know if this is a controversial statement, it feels controversial, but maybe a ton of people secretly feel the same. But I would say the 3DS is underratedly bad as far as Mario goes. It has the worst 3D Mario, I would say, the worst new Super Mario Bros. Title. It might not have the worst Mario Party game, but it does have several titles that are all offensively bad as well. Its sports games are weak. It has the worst Mario and Luigi game. Even the Mario Kart is weaker than the 2 titles it's sandwiched in between, I'd say. And it may have the worst Paper Mario game, by just a tiny margin. Yeah, okay, maybe Sticker Star is not literally the worst Mario game on the 3DS, but it is easily the one that brings up the most hate. Like, Mario Party and sports games on handhelds were never top tier, so that Mario Party the top 100 and Mario Sports Superstars aren't it couldn't be a huge shock. But a Paper Mario title, that has no excuse to be this terrible. I just don't get it. Paper Mario had such a good thing going, it performed well, it reviewed well, it was beloved, and even though Super Paper Mario did take things in a different direction, I think that's an enjoyable game regardless. It's like Sticker Star somewhere along the way decided that both the Thousand Year Door and Super Paper Mario sucked, and so everything had to change. Things that worked for 3 entries in a row now had to be done differently, whether it actually resulted in something good or not. And sure, while the complete removal of original characters and settings definitely didn't help, it's not like a few new species could have suddenly made this game good. Sticker Star is rotten to the core in a way even the worst Mario Parties and Mario Sports games aren't, I think. Although, the Wii U definitely set out to test that hypothesis. Mario Party 10 is in certain aspects even worse than Mario Party 9, and that's saying something. In my opinion, what redeems it from being the worst game though is the Bowser Party mode, which still isn't great and incredibly one-dimensional, but at least it's fun to play in multiplayer. That should be the bare minimum, but it's more than Sticker Star can say. Or the questionable winner of the Wii U, Mario Tennis Ultra Smash. I genuinely didn't think it was possible to release a Mario game this devoid of wackiness, character and charm. How have we arrived at the point that a simple item, one of many in Mario Kart or New Super Mario Bros, is the main gimmick of a Mario Sports title? There is nothing here to excite you, there is no content to dive into, it's essentially an EA Sports game, but with Mario instead of Roger Federer and Peach instead of Serena Williams. Why would anyone want that? Who is interested in a sports game that is this bare bones? I mean, the answer would be tennis fans, but what genuine tennis fan wants to pick this up? It's such a baffling mismatch and one of Nintendo's most cynical games. It really feels like a just release it and bring in any money we can get kind of title. Nintendo's mission, according to themselves, is to put smiles on people's faces and surprise players. And even if not all their games are equally as good, I can at least see how they would fit this mission statement. Like, Mario Party 9 is terrible, but it is surprising. For Ultra Smash, that doesn't work. There is nothing to be enjoyed here. Absolutely nothing. And last but not least, the Nintendo Switch. Very long list of games, with a ton of them absolutely amazing, and several series that had entered a bit of a rut during the Wii U and 3DS era more or less picked themselves up again here. One more than the other, sure, but overall I think the quality of Mario titles on Switch is incredibly high. But of course we're looking at the opposite end of the spectrum, the worst games on offer, and there I think there are 3 clear candidates. The first is WarioWare Move It. I didn't think it was possible for a WarioWare game to drop the ball like this game did, but to go all in on motion controls when that is not the Switch's strong suit at all was definitely a choice. There were so many micro games in this game that I just couldn't reliably beat because my Joy-Con would not register my movements. It turned what was supposed to be a fun, wacky party game into an actual frustrating experience. Compared to WarioWare Gold for 3DS, or even Get It Together, which did something different but at least did it very well, Move It was a tremendous letdown. Mario Golf Super Rush and Mario Strikers Battle League are two games with the exact same strengths and problems. Solid presentation, strong core gameplay, way too little content to actually dive into, to the point it kills the games completely. There is no gameplay loop in these titles, just gameplay. You don't get rewards or incentives or anything else to make you want to play again. All you do is play, and play again, and play again. Depending on how much fun you find golf and football to be, eventually that fun runs out at some point and then you never boot up the game again. I've personally always heavily preferred football and strikers over golf, so I could never put Battle League below Super Rush, but if you look at it objectively, they're basically just as bad as one another. Move It, I somewhere kinda hope that maybe the game just not working was also partly on me, which would still not make it good or anything, but at least it then would not be as offensive as these two sports games, so Wario's in the clear. Purely based on my preference, I'm calling Super Rush the worst Mario game on Switch, but if you find Battle League to be worse, I can definitely see your point. So, what do you consider the worst Mario games on every system? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Mario content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.